All right, last time we talked about decision making, and a lot of the decision making goes into our topic for today, and that is public budgeting. And so here's the opening budget crisis that we're going to start with. You're the city manager. The mayor walks in and says, "Hey, we got a problem. The city wants to hire 20 new bus drivers after last month's complaints. The community wants more social services and mental health programs. The fire department needs new equipment. The permitting office is backed up and needs more staff. Our revenue is down 15% from last year." So, how do you decide what gets funded and what doesn't? Who should make these choices? How do you balance competing demands with limited resources? Right? All of those decision making components that we discussed last time come into play here. And this is also where the money is. So, what is public budgeting really about? A budget is a plan. It's also a policy statement. Fundamentally, it's a political document. It determines who gets what, when, and how. It's a control mechanism. And it also is a reflection of our values, what we prioritize. The budgets are the most important policy documents a government produces because they determine what actually happens. Why is this important to you? So, it's going to determine if you have a job, if that position is funded to hire you. It's going to shape the programs and services you can provide. It's going to limit your options because resource constraints affect everything. It's going to measure your success, and it's going to reflect your values, and show in a real sense that public spending is on people and services, transit, sanitation, public health, fire, parks, libraries. This is typically all that consumes the majority of a city's discretionary budget. And so where it puts the money reflects its values, reflects its priorities, reflects its kind of fundamental beliefs about the nature of politics. The kind of fundamental questions. It answers what a government should do, how much it should spend, who should pay, who decides, and how are the decisions made for all of these things. All right, so in reality, where the money goes, 68% of agency budgets go to salary and wages, benefits and pensions, overtime and pay, training and development. The rest of the money goes into equipment and technology and operations. Government budgets affect us all, right? They are fiscal policy tools. Spending can create economic activity. Taxation can take money out of the economy. And borrowing can use up future resources for current needs. There's a kind of economic impact on employment, on the local economy, on service costs, and on economic development. Some basic terminology in budgets. Fiscal year is a 12-month budget period, often from July 1st to June 30th in the public sector. Revenue is money coming in, expenditures, money going out. Surplus is when revenue exceeds expenditures. Deficit is when expenditures exceed revenue. And debt is accumulated borrowing over time. Some examples: user fees and licenses are revenue source. Grants for local transportation and housing. Bond issues for school construction, that's a debt obligation. And special assessments for infrastructure projects. So we said budgets are political documents. They, recognize these competing values that we've been talking about all term long, right? Getting the most for your money, efficiency, fair distribution, equity, achieving desired outcomes, effectiveness, and economy, spending as little as possible. There's a lot of pressures, though, as well, right? There's pressures from interest groups. There's political electoral politics pressure. There's media attention. And then there's crises events that actually punctuate all of the rest of this. Here's 3 different areas, like we frequently do in this class, for kind of some real world examples of political pressures. Let's do the school district one at the top. The other 2 are public works and transit. Class size mandates, pressure to hire more teachers versus fund facilities. Back to basics, increasing instructional funding, safety incidents, pressure for security upgrades and counseling, equity initiatives, funding for community school programs. All of these kind of are political pressures that come from the public, from interest groups, from the media, onto school district budgets. And you can see the kind of pressures coming from multiple stakeholder angles here as well in these other two areas. All right, so the process itself, how it really works. A lot of it is budget preparation. You are just doing planning, and this is about half the year. Agencies submit their requests, executives review those requests and modify them. There's a period for public hearing and stakeholder input, and then the budget is adopted. And this is kind of done with some legislative review, whether it's a state legislature or a city council or a community, a county board of supervisors or something like that. There's this kind of legislative review and modification, hearing times in committees and floor debates, and then final passage and a signature. Then the budget is executed during the fiscal year. Agencies are spending the money, they're accounting for it, and they're adjusting given some changing circumstances. And then after the fiscal year ends, they are evaluating, doing audits, performance reviews, and learning lessons for the next budget cycle. But like I said, the budget cycle is about half the year. So as soon as you start executing the current budget, you're already planning and preparing for the next budget cycle. It's just a never-ending hamster wheel of budgeting on this budget calendar. And so here's when things happen. January to March, for instance, performance review, need assessment, citizen surveys. April to June, departmental budget requests, capital planning. July to September, executive preparation, community input. October, December, legislative review, final output. Throughout the year, kind of ongoing grant applications, emergency adjustments, quarterly performance reviews, overtime monitoring. There's a number of different ways and types of budgets that cities and agencies and governments have. There's the kind of operating budget, a capital budget, a cash budget, and a performance budget. There's different types of budgeting that kind of have evolved over time. Different ways to build a budget. The traditional way is a line item budget. You're kind of listing the items to be purchased and putting the price of that purchase on there, kind of just list-wise in a spreadsheet, for instance. It's easy to understand and monitor. Performance-based budgeting links expenditure to outcomes. Program budgeting organizes budgets by programs or functions. And zero-based budgeting starts from $0 every year and justifies every expenditure. It's time-consuming but thorough. So some examples of a line item budgeting for Public Works Department. Traditional approach here, you have the salaries for personnel, you have line items for the equipment, you have line items for operation, and then you sum everything down. Looking at a performance budget in the same department, the outcome-focused approach, you have a stewardship program that costs this much money. There's performance measures, pothole response time, 3 days. Pavement condition index, 75% of streets is good. Resident satisfaction, 78%. Worker training hours, 40 hours per employee. So cost per unit. Each pothole, $115. Each lane mile resurfaced, $38,000. Cost per crew, $92. Cost per resident, $84. And so you're building the budget based on those costs to achieve the performance measure. Performance budgeting, I should say, is how most well-organized professional cities are going to organize their budgets. So grants, this is where a lot of money does come into a number of different levels of government. Federal grants like community development block grants are for housing, infrastructure, and low-income areas. There's Title I funding for high-poverty schools. There's FEMA grants, and there are surface transportation block grants for highway projects. There are challenges. So the federal government provides money, but then there's matching requirements. So local funds or state funds need to also match or kind of match on a formula. So federal government provides 60, local government plus state government provides 40, to keep it simple. There's detailed reporting obligations. Challenge with grants is once the money runs out, do you keep the program going? How do you keep the program going? And so that's a real kind of planning thing that is important to consider with grant budgeting. Constraints and trade-offs in budgets. You're kind of living in this reality of scarcity, scarce personnel and equipment. So which one do you choose? Prevention versus response. Which one do you choose? Quality versus quantity. Which one do you choose? Short-term, long-term. Which one do you choose? Right. This is kind of the real constraints to the trade-offs that you have to deal with. Performance-based budgeting in practice, linking money to results. We kind of did this with our example above in Public Works. The traditional here, you're funding 50 positions, and the performance-based, you're funding operations to achieve that 3-day pothole response time. Must be Irvine here, right? So you're traditional in a school district, you're funding 5 coaches and support staff, and in the performance space, you're funding literacy interventions to move 80% of the students to grade level reading. So the focus with this approach is it's focusing on outcomes, not just the inputs, not just the dollars and people going in, but what's actually achieved. 80% of those kids are reading at the grade level. And you have accountability for results. If the 80% aren't reading, then you've done something wrong. Those potholes are filled in 5 days, then you're doing something wrong. And so you're able to compare across jurisdictions. Is one jurisdiction spending this amount of money, getting 80% of students versus another school spending the same amount? Are they able to do it too? Measuring outcomes is really difficult though. Not just potholes and student reading at grade level, but what actually is achieved from an input is kind of difficult to actually measure, even if you think about measurement over the long term, right? So you're filling all the potholes today, but what happens when a giant storm comes through and now you've got 20 different potholes across the city? Or what happens when the kids move from 3rd grade to 4th grade and they don't have the same support structure, right? Is that outcome lost? Technology is certainly at place here. We kind of continue to reflect on technology. This is software, this is data-driven decision-making, and this is transparency tools. The challenges in budget challenges in public service, rising costs. Everything's more expensive. I know your own everything is more expensive that you have to purchase. Same for cities. Whatever it may be, the human capital that they're hiring, the technology, compliance with whatever legal order that they are operating under. Everything is the costs are rising, and there are at the same time reduced resources, right? Revenue pressures, political pressures to reduce taxes, tax caps and spending restrictions, and competition for the same amount of resources. And there are demographic changes, right? Aging populations require more resources than other populations, and they have different tax capacities. There's economic inequality, and so greater need and reduced ability to pay. All of these are real budgeting challenges. All right, shifting gear, let's look at kind of the federalism structure here about how the different levels interact. So this would be called fiscal federalism. The federal role is providing national programs and standards, grant funding, but also requiring things that the lower level governments do without funding. And providing emergency assistance and support. The state role is education, funding, formulas, standards, professional licensing and certification, revenue sharing, and coordination. At the local level, day-to-day service delivery is delivered. There are community-specific priorities and property tax funding base. And there's this kind of direct accountability to the residents of that local community. The challenge is coordinating across all these different levels, with different priorities, different timelines, and certainly these days, different politics. There are a lot of ethics that go into the responsibilities of budget professionals. So honesty, transparency, stewardship, fairness, of course. And there are accountability mechanisms that kind of, there are those inner checks of these ethical principles and these external checks of accountability mechanisms to bring back kind of a discussion that we've had before. There is certainly budgeting during crises. So natural disasters are going to happen, public safety crisis, These are emergency situations, and budgets have to be flexible enough to respond given these needs. This is a great reason that cities and states have what are called rainy day funds. So this is extra money that they have set aside when the stuff hits the fan. So again, future trends, like we've talked about for each of these modules, technology is coming for just about every component of budgeting that there is. AI assisted analysis, blockchain for transparent financial transactions, mobile apps for the public to engage, and real-time performance monitoring. Outcome-based budgeting, pay for success, citizen engagement. There's this kind of notion of a participatory budgeting process and online platforms where the public can provide input. Like so many other things, if you want to go into budgeting, this is where the money is, literally and figuratively. Right, these are the high-paying jobs often in public organizations because they require technical, political, and management skills, and a number of analytical skills as well. All right, so there's a case study here that you can check out on school transportation reform, looking at competing demands, what the stakeholders want, what the options are, and then your task is to figure out what you're going to do, how you're going to analyze it, and what recommendation you're going to make. So pause there and take a look at it. All right, you can pause here too at these consideration questions to think about budgeting. And then pause here to think about the summary of the budgeting module. All right, that's it for this one. Thanks so much.